Present.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Here.
Mr. Bush.
Here.
Vice President Darrow.
Here.
President McClellan.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Everyone's had the opportunity to review the minutes from our last meeting. Without any changes to that, I'd ask for a motion to approve the board minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Kalinowski and Mr. Bush.
Newmoff.
Newhoff, sorry. Mr. Newhoff,
I'll project better next time.
thank you. Roll call, please.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Vice President Darrow.
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes. Any additions or corrections to tonight's agenda?
I'm President McClellan, member of the Board of Education. There is an addendum agenda this evening for an additional personnel action item.
With that addition, could I have an motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Bush and then Mr. Newhoff. Roll call,
With
please.
authority.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
Vice President Darrow.
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes. And so our first item tonight is a public hearing. Sawyers?
Thank you, President McClellan. The purpose of this hearing is to provide opportunity for public comment on the New Albany-Plain Local School District Board of Education's intention to consider a request for reemployment as a bus driver from retiring employee Carol LaFollette. At this time, the Board of Education will hear any public commentary relative to a future action item for continued employment of Carol post-retirement. Mr. Galloway, any persons?
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to communications to the board and superintendent's items. And I believe tonight we just have item A.
We do, but before we get to the update from PLE, I want to make one statement. As a school district, clearly our hearts go out to all that are impacted by the tragic events of school violence that are happening throughout our nation. Which each violent act, we're reminded, whether in a school environment or as a community, of the important role we all play as a source of prevention to tragic and senseless acts of violence. We're committed as a school district to the safety and security of our students, our staff, and our learning environments. To ensure everyone's safety, we continue to partner with our local law enforcement, firefighters, and other first responders to review and practice safety plans, require drills, and make necessary improvements. Our school safety plans are updated annually and are reviewed and approved by and filed with the New Albany Police Department, Plain Township Fire Department, and the Attorney General's Office through the Bureau of Criminal Investigation and Homeland Security. Approximately on February 15th, it wasn't approximately, but on February 15th, I sent out a communication message through Newswire related to these safety plans, and since then have received several inquiries asking from parents for the details of the safety plan, the specific information included in the safety plan, and access to those details. And I just want to publicly acknowledge receipt of those emails, and I have responded to you. But for the record, share publicly, as a school district, we will not publish the details of those safety plans that have been approved by the Attorney General's Office and our first responders in accordance with Ohio Revised Code. Further, tonight, I ask for our parents and guardians to continue to assist me and our building administrators, and really our entire staff as a whole, with safety and security protocols on our school campus by doing a few things to help us. The first is to have age-appropriate conversations with children at home to reinforce that significant consequences, including the removal from school, are possible for making any threatening comments or actions that jeopardize the safety and welfare of anyone on our school campus. We've had some recent issues on the school campus related to threats made towards our student body by other students. We will be transparent. That's as much as I can tell you. And those have been swiftly held The students have been swiftly held accountable for those actions, and students have received appropriate levels of discipline in relationship to those threats. So I need to ask parents, and it's really a plea for middle school, high school dominantly, because it's an age-appropriate conversation, that students need to think before they speak or talk about something that they think is a joke that's not a joke. So the person receiving that information can view it as a threat. And we as a school community need to have open, honest conversations with our kids and talk about the reality that although they think they're joking, the person who's receiving that information and hearing it may not know that they're joking. And given what's happening in society today throughout the nation, we need to pay particular attention to the types of comments that are being made or specific acts that are being referenced, because they will lead to the most significant and severe consequence possible in accordance with Ohio Revised Code. So I'm not trying to make people weary that we're out to try to catch kids, but we have to help our kids make some different choices because the conversation needs to be age appropriate. And middle school, high school kids know the difference between what's appropriate and not appropriate to be making a threat towards another student, particularly related to the current gun violence conversations that are going on. The second piece is really a plea to families to understand that I have directed every employee that sits in a main office in our school campus or in a security position to check photo identification for visitors to our school campus. You will not be admitted to the school campus if you do not produce a photo ID. We have received some pushback, I'm gonna say it nicely, and a little bit of attitude for persons that say, he knows me, she knows me. Well, that person may not be sitting at that desk the day that you come to school. There could be a substitute there for a secretary as an example. So the rule in the school district is you will produce a photo identification to gain access or to remove a student from our school campus. That rule is required, and school employees have been directed and reminded by my office that they better be adhering to it for the safety and welfare of everyone involved. The last piece in relationship to that is as you exit the school campus, so if you're a visitor to our school campus and you check in, we ask that you please check out. We do track visitors across the school campus so that we know who's on campus at any point in time in the system in the event there is an emergency. If there's a fire drill under Ohio Revised Code, we are also responsible to verify the whereabouts of any visitor on the school campus. So we know if you've checked in at the office, you're supposed to be at that fire drill. So we look for you as a visitor in that building to verify that you are accounted for because there's a fire or an emergency or something like that. So I ask that families please check out if you've checked in. So if you're in the building and you got past go because you produced your photo identification, please tell the main office you're departing. Don't go out a back door or a side door because we don't know that you've left the building. So please exit through the main office. Lastly, you've likely seen the national attention encouraging organized student walkouts on March 14th and April 20th at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning. As a district, we're concerned about the safety and security of publicly advertising such events, and we're working with the New Albany Police Department and our middle and high school students to create plans for these dates to protect the safety and welfare of any students who may elect to participate. Mr. Carter and Mrs. LeBeau are each working with student advisories, PTO representatives, and interested parents that have emailed us to plan peaceful opportunities that are secure in nature for students on March 14th and April 20th, respectively. Additional information will be forthcoming to all parents in our school district. We appreciate your patience in allowing us to work with our students, our faculty, staff, and school resource officers, and the New Albany Police Department to finalize the plans for those dates. And we have met several times with the school resource officers and the New Albany Police Department and are confident that we can help our students make responsible choices in relationship to the national campaign that's being advertised for both March 14th and April 20th. Families will have the opportunity to tell us that their child may not participate, but again, that's an age-appropriate conversation at home that the student should be having with his or her parent or guardian to help advise them on what their preferences would be. We will talk about what specifically we're going to do that day to honor the request that students have given to the school district. So the student advisories did come forward to Mr. Carter and to Mrs. LeBeau after the national advertisement of the walkouts. They're willing to work with us because we have shared with them that we as an administrative team have significant concern about publicly advertising this mass exit of kids at the same time across the United States on March 14th and April 20th, and what could happen. We believe there's a different way to have a peaceful solution that protects the safety and welfare of kids, and we will be talking about that with families through the building principals. Are there any questions about anything I've just talked about from the board?
Will parent authorization be required?
It'll be opt-out. So every kid will be opted in for participation unless you choose to opt out, is typically how it works. And we'll explain what the specific activities are. It's a 17-minute walkout is what's being advertised. It's 1 minute per victim for Broward County for the most recent school shootings in Florida, which clearly are a tragedy. So we'll honor that opportunity for student participation. And currently the conversations are a peace gathering. My wording, I don't know that that's what it's going to be called, but a peace gathering type of an assembly for students that's age appropriate for middle school or high school. And again, we'll share those specific agendas, the content, and what we're specifically going to do through Mr. Carter and Mrs. LeBeau. That'll probably be coming out next week, correct, Donna? Your PTO meeting is Wednesday? Yes, so Donna's talking about it Wednesday night with her PTO. They've met with the student advisories. Dwight Carter met with the high school last week, and I think you have an upcoming meeting with the high school kids again tomorrow morning to finalize what student, because it's a student-led event, so we're honoring student participation. We're just trying to create a structure that I don't want 1,600 kids in a courtyard all at the same time that's publicly advertised as 10 a.m. So we're trying to come up with a different way to do it, but in the guise of keeping kids safe, because I am concerned about the safety and welfare of that public advertisement that's happening throughout the United States. Any other questions? Anything you can do if parents do approach you, they're welcome to contact any administrator in the school district, but please reinforce the biggest issue we're hearing about is the photo identification, but I believe it is reasonable that a parent should produce a photo ID upon entry to the school. And anything you can do to encourage that conversation if you're asked would be greatly supported and appreciated.
I completely support checking IDs at the door. I think it's one small step we can take to add some rigor around the security at entrances.
Okay, with that, I think we're going to do the plea update before we do presentation.
Okay.
Plea.
Good evening. I'm Kristen Howell. I'm one of the art teachers at the primary building. We have lots to share with you this time. Beginning with the ELC, the kindergarten team, organized by Christy Robbins, created Valentines for police and firefighters this month. Janine Joseph organized a winter animal presentation for the kindergartners, and they were able to see real-life preserved versions of the animals. Shelley Schaub worked with the kindergarten team during a half-day in-service to help inspire interactive writing throughout the ELC. Several primary teachers participated in a course facilitated by second grade teacher Becky Wanless, implementing morning meetings in the classroom, which promote positive classroom climate, academic growth, and positive behavior. With the guidance of librarian Kirsten Klink, many primary teachers shared books by author, illustrator Dan Yacarino, who will be visiting our school in May. He was supposed to be here this month, but we had postponements due to weather. But we did lots of work in preparation for him. Several of his books include robots. For example, Leslie Ropp and Sky Davis's students created stories and designed their own robots out of boxes, and our teacher Kristen Howell also incorporated robots into lessons in art class. Every Tuesday, Mrs. Rutherford's third grade welcomes Lauren Greenspan from the Youth Yoga Project, and students have been learning how to positively cope with emotions, learn self-awareness, and how to build stamina to focus. Students in Chrissy Pratt and Jenny Callahan's third grades have been working for months on Genius Hour projects. Students choose a topic they are passionate about and generate questions to research about the topic. On February 22nd, parents came to the classroom so students could showcase their hard work. They had nearly 100% attendance from the parents. The primary school participated in Jump Up for Your Heart during wellness class. This activity raises awareness about heart disease, and it helped raise over almost $27,000 for the American Heart Association. On February 2nd, over 90 members of the 5th grade choir, under the direction of Amy Cook and Linda Littman, performed before the Columbus Blue Jackets game on the main concourse at Nationwide Arena. Afterwards, the families were able to enjoy the game at a reduced ticket price. This was a fundraiser, and so part of the money came back to the choir, and they were able to raise over $3,000 for the choir. 5th grade students in Pete Barnes and Jenny Taylor's classrooms researched various planets to decide if there is another planet in our solar system that could sustain life. Students then completed additional research about Mars, brainstormed what a shelter would look like on Mars that would allow pioneers to live a long and healthy life. They then put these ideas on a blueprint using computer software, and then students brought their blueprint to life by creating a 3D shelter on Minecraft, and then they projected it so that all of their classmates could see and they could share their ideas. The intermediate library staff, led by Brooke Shackelford, worked with the administrators to plan a breakfast and books event where families could come shop at the book fair to support our intermediate school library while enjoying breakfast together. As part of the ongoing Paragon Character Education Series in Humanities for all freshmen, Danny Gibson, Rachel Broswell, and Sarah Hrick planned and gave a presentation to all freshmen on being adaptable, strategies of adaptability, and successful people who model those strategies. And I've got one more, which somehow didn't end up on here, but the art teachers at the primary building, we had a play for staff session after school one day. So staff were able to come to the art room and decompress, socialize, and get creative and learn some clay construction techniques. So we had about 25 people attend that. They made little clay fish sculptures. So that was a lot of fun. Thank you. That's it from Fleet.
Great. Before we get to our continuous improvement plan and progress update, any board liaison reports this evening? Okay. Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you, President McClellan. I'd like to welcome Jess Mamias, the Coordinator of Assessment and Accountability. She's going to update the Board of Education on the CIP goals, Continuous Improvement Plan goals, number 1 through number 4 for the benchmarks. And then I will talk about benchmarks 5 through 7. Jess.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the board for allowing me to share with you the mid-year updates on the Continuous Improvement Plan. Just as a reminder, I'll go through the first 4 benchmarks, but benchmark 1 is to increase the district's performance index as compared to all Ohio school districts on the local report card from number 38 to number 32. New Albany administers MAP, Measures of Academic Progress assessments 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. MAP is a nationally normed assessment that has a high correlation to the performance on the Ohio State tests and will be used as our mid-year check. MAP is a computer adaptive assessment. Each student is provided with a specific set of questions based upon the student's performance at the time of the assessment. When a student answers a question correctly, the difficulty of the question increases. If a student incorrectly answers a question, the system will ask another question at the same level. When a student answers a question incorrectly 2 times in a row, it'll adjust again. But if the student answers a question correct, it'll start going back up. Although there is a high correlation between MAP scores and OST performance levels, the difference in assessment platforms need to be considered. MAP is an entirely multiple choice question or multiple choice test, where Ohio State tests have multiple assessment types, interactive questions such as multiple choice, drop down, hot text, fill in the blank, drag and drop, extended response essays, just to name a few. MAP provides projections to Ohio State performance levels the Ohio State performance levels based upon the spring scores. For the 16-17 school year, MAP projections aligned to students' ELA scores 75 to 80% of the time, and math scores aligned approximately 75% of the time. We're just going to take a look at English language arts. NWA, the company that administers MAP, conducted a linking study between MAP RIT scores and the students' performance levels on the Ohio State tests in 2015. By using matched score data from a sample of students from around Ohio, NWA did a direct comparison of RIT scores to scaled scores on the spring OST. MAP can then correlate a spring RIT score to a projected performance level on the Ohio State test. These projections represents the student's probability, how likely the student will meet or exceed proficiency levels based upon the fall and winter MAP scores in grades 3 through 8. At this time, over 80% of our students are projected at least proficient on the ELA spring OST. So when you look, and I know you guys have it in front of you, the limited, it will give you ranges. It doesn't give you a score, but it will give you a performance level that a student is projected to fall within. So we can look at the different grade levels and see the percentages for the 5 performance bands on the spring OST. When looking at specific grade levels, we can see trends in performance of students in 6th grade over time. That is your graph on the left, the ELA percentiles. Compared to last year's students, winter MAP scores for students currently in the 6th grade, they started at a lower percentile, but their winter MAP scores are at a higher percentile than the same time last year. So they're making really good gains. They started at a lower percentile and their winter percentiles are higher. For 7th grade ELA, fall to winter student percentiles increased by 5%. So again, you'll see that when you look at that beginning percentile for the fall, which is in blue, and that jump, again, they started at a lower percentile than the previous cohort, but they're now at the same level as the previous cohort. So we're making gains within that 7th grade ELA. At the intermediate building, I have worked with the academic support staff to identify students that are at risk based upon the winter MAP results, along with additional internal assessments. The TNL reading team, math support, and administration have worked to identify ways to provide additional support for at-risk students. At the middle school, I've worked with the building administration to identify students that are projected basic or limited. Identified students are receiving additional supports during their EAGLE period. For MAP, due to the math progressions in New Albany, the projection report for MAP does not accurately show student projections. MAP uses projections by grade level, so a student is a 4th grader, its scores are projected to the 4th grade math test. This means that there is no projection for a 4th grader that is currently taking a 6th grade math class. In addition, new this year, MAP introduced 3 new math assessments: Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. Students in those courses at the middle school are now taking their corresponding MAP test aligned to their course. So last year's, when we look at the percentiles or look at the group as a cohort, it included those students that were in Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. We have now removed them from that particular cohort and compared them to scores for students across with Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. It's a much better comparison, but unfortunately that does not allow us to look at trend data for 7th or 8th grade in terms of MAP projections. So I've chosen here the 4th grade, which is on your left, and the 6th grade math percentiles on your right. 4th grade math has shown a significant increase in percentiles, 74 to 81, from this fall to this last testing in January. From winter to winter, so if we compare one cohort to the next, there was a 6th percentile increase from 75 to 81. The current 6th graders also have shown a significant increase from fall to winter, 77 to 81, and from last year's cohort to this year's cohort, 76 to 81. Again, the intermediate and the middle schools have both identified on grade level students that are projected below passing and are providing additional support for those students.
Before you go to benchmark 2,
Yeah.
So just to make sure it's clear, so if you are in sixth grade now, you're taking algebra. You are no longer included in these numbers.
Correct.
You're now carved out in the algebra cohort, which is new.
But then you mentioned not being able to, does that, can you still see that they're a sixth grader? So you can see the numbers, or does it cause changes in the numbers that you're seeing for folks that are taking algebra, whether they're in seventh or eighth grade?
So if I go back to this for ELA, these are, oh, I hate the touch screen.
Don't touch it.
Let's try not.
Too much technology in here.
So it's just by grade level. So for these particular third graders,
You can swipe.
I can. So I'm not going to touch. These particular fourth graders, it's making the projection to the fourth grade test. I can still see what grade they're in. For ELA, everyone's taking the ELA test. But for math, if I were to look at this for seventh grade, it's the Algebra 1 students are in there, but it's projecting it to the seventh grade test, which they're not taking. So that becomes, the projections aren't very accurate at that point. And so we pulled them out of the pool. And so next year when we have multiple sets of the Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, we'll have a better trend to look for.
You also mentioned students who are at the limited and basic.
Correct.
And mentioned that they're getting extra time in equal period or whatever. What exactly is being done during that time? It's based on the individual student?
Yes, and when we get to Performance Matters, I'm going to show you a couple of things in regards to how we can look for students' strengths and students' areas of challenge and how we can address those individual needs.
I was just going to piggyback on John's question. Does somebody else have a question first?
Go ahead, no.
Didn't-
Please piggyback.
So I'm guessing the data is there for a sixth grader, but the MAP software doesn't automatically give you projections that would tie them to the same state test. Is that correct?
Correct. So as a matter of fact, MAP is actually doing a new linking study specifically for the Algebra 1 Geometry and Algebra 2. So we will have much better projections, hopefully within the next year or so as MAP.
Because if the data is there, we can do something with it. It may not be, the code to generate the projections may not be there, but maybe we can get the raw data and, do some work ourselves. Is that possible or no?
We can try.
Yeah,
Teachers
I
know
think and the teachers do that. And I think
Yeah.
when Jess shows you Performance Matters, when we get to a student example, she can show you that on the teacher
Yeah.
side. So we do that. It's just not done by MAP.
Gotcha.
MAP does not have that built into their current software.
In the meeting we had a couple of weeks ago, the alternate compensation committee meeting, I learned a lot about what's available to teachers, and
Jess is actually going to show that
yeah, it's
tonight.
good stuff.
So you got to see the preview because you were on a different committee. So the rest of the board gets to see it.
It was good stuff. I thought it was good stuff.
Well, now let's go.
So I just had a question, and I may be misinformed on some of this, but I know that one of our challenges last year was the 7th and 8th grade English language arts. And so if I look at this chart and you talk about the limited and basic, the percentages seem like they creep up the higher the grade level. Am I reading that accurately? That we have roughly 20% and then 25% in 7th and 8th grade that are still at limited and basic. So, okay. And then I'm just reading these charts incorrectly because it seems like there's not as much progress in English language arts, 6th and 7th grade, year over year, spring to spring.
These are percentiles. So they are the national percentiles. So when I look at the 6th grade in the spring, this is in that room. I'm gonna look over here because I think I put the wrong chart in, because this is year to year and not fall, winter, spring. I'm gonna look here because this is fall, spring. So when you look at percentiles, these are the beginning places where they're coming in. So when you look at this particular cohort, I swear I can't touch it. When I look at those percentiles, right, where are we amongst the national norms? Because these are nationally normed assessments. We are getting them to the same place no matter where they're starting with us. And so we are moving them up. There was definitely a dip here in the percentiles, 1 percentile from 15, 16 to 16, 17. But these are things that I know in particular in conversations with Mrs. LeBeau, that this has been a focus, is that 7th grade ELA.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification. Just
Yep.
clearly a concern of mine based on last year's results. And
Yeah.
good to see some of the progress.
Any other questions about benchmark 1?
Mike, did you have a question?
So just to refresh your memory, benchmark 2 is to facilitate a year or more of growth for every year of instruction. MAP growth interim assessments are administered again 3 times a year. The achievement scores from MAP are nationally normed. The norms are established for each administration. So fall has its own norms, winter has its set of norms, and spring has its own set. From these norms, MAP calculates projected growth goals based upon the amount of growth that is typical for a similar student. By providing a projected goal, teachers can move beyond the simple conclusion that a student did or did not make growth or the target growth. Within the MAP system, there are individual student profiles that identify areas that a student has mastered. So those are the things that they can do on their own. The areas that are considered instructional, what they continue to need additional support in the classroom, and skills that can be introduced. So those are those higher skills that they can put their toe in the water with. These tools allow for targeted instruction for students. These 2 bar charts, the top is reading, the bottom is math, represent the projected growth versus the observed growth from fall to winter. The diamonds represent the school's projected growth from the national norms, and the blue bar represents the observed growth in that grade level. You will notice that students have met or exceeded the projected growth for all grades. MAP reading is only administered in grades 2 through 8. This year, math was given in grades 4 through 8 in the fall. Grade 3 participated in the winter math testing window, therefore no fall to winter projections. For the first time, math is being administered to a select group of students in the high school. At this time, MAP is not calculating growth projections for 11th graders. There are too few 11th graders across the nation taking these assessments, therefore they don't feel confident, reliable in those projections. So you will notice, like I said, on all of these, that we have either met or exceeded the growth target that MAP has projected for each grade level. Questions about benchmark 2?
Can you maybe just speak a little bit to how the growth is projected by MAP?
So those set norms from fall to winter to spring. So they look at a student that, let's say, has a RIT score of 220 in the fall. And based upon those national linking studies, they said, okay, if a student is 220 in the fall, what is the average growth when they get to winter? And it's within that average growth, and there's over 100,000 data points that they've used in order to make that. They say this is what a similar student made from fall to winter. And then they'll do the same from fall to spring. And so we have projections for a student from their initial fall assessment and where they should be in the spring when the students will test.
So they're using actually the same year's data from all similar schools. Okay. They're not looking at last year.
They're looking, the norms are set. So those were done in 2015. So they're just looking at a typical student and they're using that 2015 as their guide.
And does this help us to see if every student will have at least a year's worth of growth?
So I think this gives us an idea of that we are moving our students forward. We were talking about they're meeting their projections, along with the projections that I talked about with their OST performance, but are they moving along like a typical student? So every teacher gets reports, the run reports in regards to the students in their classroom, and they can see, are students moving towards their projected growth or have they not? And if they haven't, those are some conversations that I've had with, in particular at the intermediate, regards to what are those next steps. I know Ms. Toma and the MTSS team has worked really hard in looking at the MAP scores and trying to decide who needs what support and how are we going to provide that support. So it provides us with a substantial amount of information in regards to helping move students forward.
I just want to make sure I'm reading the chart correctly. So I see a diamond that represents the school norm's projected growth, and then the blue bar, which is observed growth. So when I look at it, I see the blue bar is below the tip of the diamond on the top chart. So the way I'm looking at it, it tells me that we haven't reached the projected growth. Am I reading it wrong?
No, I was looking at it at the middle of the diamond.
I don't know which part of the diamond I'm supposed to be looking at.
I know this is where I look at the middle of the diamond.
Okay.
So if we look at the middle of the diamond, it's above. The only place that is kind of right on the top of the line is that 6th grade ELA. Everywhere else, when you look at the middle of the diamond, the observed growth is higher.
Okay. So the middle of the diamond is the line, not the tip. Okay.
So to follow up on that and Mr. Newmoff's question from earlier, it looks as though we are making some improvements in 7th and 8th grade as it relates to English language arts. What have we been doing to get that achievement?
Mrs. LeBeau, do you want to come to the podium to answer that question, to give specific examples? It is a targeted area. Mr. Newmoff is right. That was, as a result of last year's data, there were specific improvement plans put in place. So Mrs. LeBeau can share some of the things that have happened at the middle school.
So we have common planning time, and in that common planning time, our 7th and 8th grade teachers meet and talk about data in kids, and we have study center. We don't have equal period, but we have study center, and so we have targeted groups in study center different days of the week to work on specific goals. We are also using lots of commonlit.org, which mirrors the assessments that are on the Ohio State tests, and that information, kids do that for homework or in class or with me in a targeted group. And that information provides us with an opportunity to extend learning.
It was an example of that. I'm going to use commonlit.org, and Donna, you can add to it, but to give you a specific example, based upon last year's results, when you actually did the disaggregation of the data and look at the analysis of maybe one teacher outperformed another teacher. So what is it that teacher was specifically doing that got kids to a specific area in a strand of the test that demonstrated they had high levels of student achievement? So maybe it was commonlit.org became an authentic resource that was discovered to be used in one teacher's classroom that produced significant evidence that the kids actually demonstrated higher levels of achievement. That then becomes a conversation within the department to say, John shouldn't be only teacher using commonlit.org because look at the results he got with his kids having this authentic resource. I should be talking about this too with my kids and giving my kids access to this common resource that basically then becomes an authentic resource used as a teaching tool.
So part of our conversation on PD Day on Tuesday was because we were doing prefixes and suffix, when our foreign language teachers looked at, our global language teachers looked at the data and which of those children that were struggling with prefixes and suffixes or vocabulary or Greek and Latin roots, based on that data, oh, they're sitting in my Spanish 1 class or my French 1A class. What can I do within that context? And so we've had some rich dialogue around, I can support ELA by making sure that I draw attention to Latin roots and how they are in French, like manicure and pedicure. And so that's kind of a global conversation that we have beyond ELA.
the reconfiguration of the buildings, is that extending down to sixth grade? Because last year would have had sort of 6, 7, 8 ELA altogether. And again, not to pick on the chart, but that looks like that's the one area we were maybe just below the norm in terms of the progress.
Mrs. Nowak or Mr. Emery, sixth grade?
So in sixth grade English language arts, we have those conversations in grades 4 through 6, but moving down to the elementary level, we have adopted the NAPLS framework, which is the reading and writing workshop approach, which we've had a lot of success with the last few years in 4th and 5th grade. Teachers now have an 80-minute block of instruction to address the standards during this time. So we've provided a lot of support on reading workshop, working with Shelley Schaub, who's a literacy consultant, on what effective reading practices and word study look like during that time. And then we've also been doing some work with Calkins units of writing this year and some professional development to not only assign writing, but to actually teach writing and what does that look like. So we have a lot of supports and PD put in place. We've also just recently had mid-year data meetings with each individual teacher to look at their MAP data, as well as benchmark assessments to look at those kids that are really excelling and those that aren't. As Jess alluded to, she's been meeting with myself and Mrs. Toma and our teaching and learning team to see what additional supports need to be put in place for students who aren't performing as well. And actually, we had a big meeting today and we have some students that are going to be getting some reading intervention at sixth grade that haven't, their previous data didn't show that they needed that. So we're swooping in mid-year to provide some additional support for those students that need to. But we definitely also meet as 4th through 6th grade English language arts around reading and writing and share best practices and look at our data as well. It's a big change in practice, though, for some of our teachers going from a 50-minute block to an 80-minute block.
It's a significant shift. I mean,
Yeah.
when we go back to, and we talked about that with the benefit of increased instructional time with no additional cost to the school district because we used our faculty differently based upon how we're using our facilities differently. There is an academic benefit we're seeing in the data. So we are confident that we are on track. There's no absolute, but with all the measures that we have for formative and summative assessment on a daily basis, and then the standardized assessments that are given through MAP, we believe we are on target and on track to see significant growth yet again this year. It's not business as usual. Data is being used differently than ever before in this school district. Fair? Principals know it.
Thank you.
So to move away from the reading down to the math, the 9th and 10th grade scores.
That's new.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned that 11th grade, there's just not enough taking it. But are those numbers based on the students in that grade level or the students who are taking 9th grade math, like a 9th grade level math, 10th grade versus kids who are in some advanced?
So we have targeted this to students that are in the connections class.
Okay.
So we have less than 80 students that are taking this particular assessment.
Okay.
So when we look at that 9, 10, and 11, when we talk about numbers, we're talking about a small sample size compared to the other grade levels.
Okay.
So I'm not as confident about those projections as I am about grades 3 through 8.
But it still does provide data for those 80 kids
Yeah.
to help us understand, are they making growth and are we seeing changes based upon the instruction that's happening? Because they are the at-risk learner that's taking math at grade level or struggle with mathematics as a discipline. So those 80 kids, this is new this year that we're actually using the MAP test to try to progress monitor their growth.
Benchmark 3, meet or exceed state's gap closing standards for identified subgroups. So an Every Student Succeed Act requires that achievement data is disaggregated into 10 subgroups. 7 subgroups by race, students with disabilities, English learners, and economically disadvantaged. For the current year, for reporting purposes, a subgroup is reported on the state report card if there are at least 25 students in the specific subgroup. The intent of subgroup reporting is to hold schools accountable for all students. Fall and winter MAP data were disaggregated by ethnicity in this chart. The subgroups blocked have too few students and could potentially be identified, therefore you cannot see those. The right column represents fall MAP scores, and the middle column represents winter MAP scores. Color coding, the green represents students that scored in the 50th percentile or higher. Yellow is between the 25th and 50th percentile. Red is below the 25th percentile on their math MAP assessments. In particular, if we look at the top subgroup that are African American students, there was an increase of 5%, 52 to 57, scoring above the 50th percentile from fall to winter. Multiracial also increased by 5% from 65 to 70. There are still some significant gaps in achievement between the subgroups, specifically the African American students compared to other subgroups. This continues to be an area of focus in addressing the needs of each student.
So you're in the, or educators are in the classroom every day. That's 15 kids that are in the bottom quartile. Could you just talk about what we're doing for those 15 kids? Or is that a fair question? It may not be a fair way to ask.
I think we're looking at, like Ms. Nowak said, looking at the data and saying what interventions can we provide. So, in particular, I know the TNL team and the math support at the intermediate, we're trying to come up with creative ways in order to meet the needs of all of those students. So we do use this data in particular, like I said, Ms. Nowak, they were looking at this subgroup, those that were at risk, and really trying to target their instruction for them.
Another example I can give you, Mr. Newhoff, and I'll just use high school just because it's outside the scope. It's just a different example. And we could do the same thing at the other buildings through the MTSS process.
I apologize, Mr. Sawyer. Which grade is this? I'm missing that on.
This on here.
This on here is 6 plus, right? So it's just an example of 6th grade, but I'm going to use a high school example just so after the kids are identified in their subgroup, because you could actually be in multiple subgroups. You could be identified beyond ethnicity to students with disability or an English language learner as an additional identification. So you could be in 3 different types of subgroups. If you're identified at risk and there's additional supports that are necessary, it could be additional intervention time, it could be additional one-on-one, it could be resource time, it could be a math intervention. So like an example at the high school, because we just talked about the connections class for geometry and algebra, for students that struggle in mathematics that are taking math at grade level at the high school and or are slightly off grade level from a core content and knowledge base, those students may have a second period on their schedule. So they're in math connections, but then they also go to a math lab for additional intervention and support with a classroom teacher from the math department. So they have math 2 periods a day, much like when you think about the model at the elementary school. I may have 80 minutes of language arts. I may have 90 minutes of mathematics. That same thing is now happening at the middle school and high school for students that need additional supports and intervention in mathematics and language arts dominantly. So that's another example of what else is done. But there's really, through the multi-tiered system of support, that's this MTSS process. That's the fancy acronym for multi-tiered system of support. The teaching team gets together and talks individually about that student and says, what else can we do to help Michael be successful? Does Michael need a second language arts period? Does Michael need one-on-one tutoring and reading? Does Michael need Alex? Does Michael need additional access to other resources? Michael needs a break because Michael can't sit there for 90 minutes and he has to go walk around the building. All those things become an honest conversation to create a plan about what do I do differently to help Michael be successful because his growth is not what it needs to be. Those conversations are happening and it's very detailed, it's time consuming, but it's necessary. So, because more of the same is insanity, you're not going to help it. We have to do something different to try to figure out what works. And once you find it, then we ultimately have to replicate it for that child on a daily basis.
The intermediate, we have the 80-minute blocks for ELA and math, we have the 40-minute equal period. So plus having the double longer block, they can also get math and reading intervention during that 40-minute equal period. Whether that's their teacher working with them or whether it's one of our teaching and learning intervention teachers doing read naturally or level literacy intervention, or you have Bridges math intervention. It just depends on what each student needs.
And that data is now being tracked. So we're actually keeping the data repository that Phil talked about that Jess is going to show you, where all this information that they discover is being put into one location, so we all have access to it as educators. Really great because really becomes your history and it stays with you your entire educational career. So it's all in one location, and we understand through this process what's happening to support each individual student.
The work that you do with the at-risk kids during the EGO period, it's not optional for kids.
No.
Okay. So
It's required.
and you purposefully pair them with the right person.
They're put in small group, they're put into like groups for like content, for individualized support by classroom teachers to reteach or go through a specific discipline or subject matter, but it's required. It's not optional, you're assigned.
Equal period, though, can also be used by a teacher
For enrichment.
yeah.
We're using it for both. So back to the kids that are already making high levels of growth, what do we do to continue to help them achieve higher? Because that's the expectation of the projection. When it goes back to the data that Jess is projecting, for where we're currently at, from fall to ultimately spring, that is an expectation to have a higher level of student achievement. So what are we doing to ensure growth at the same time as achievement?
The intermediate where they get to the intervention specialist and down and they're pushing to co-teach a lesson.
I have one more.
Or
Let me get 4.
Yeah.
Benchmark 4, graduate students who are college and career ready. 2 components earn an A on the graduation rate component, and the class of 2018 will earn an ACT mean score that's at least 20% higher than the state average. Graduation rate, as students march towards graduation, counselors, teachers, and administrators have been working with students to meet the new graduation requirements for 2018. Starting with the class of 2018, students are required to earn 18 points on 7 different Ohio State tests. For students that have not met the 18 points, counselors and administrators have been working with students and parents to meet the alternative requirements for 2018 graduation. ACT, for the class of 2018 was the first graduating class, offered the state-funded ACT in the winter of 2017. The graduating cohort's highest score from the state-funded and the nationally administered exams will be released in August of 2018. The current junior class will be taking the state-funded ACT tomorrow morning. Juniors have had different opportunities to attend ACT boot camps hosted by the high school. Along with boot camps, teachers have been embedding ACT vocabulary into their daily lessons. Questions about benchmark 4?
anybody want to take the ACT tomorrow?
Sure.
So this is this the first year that we're looking at the state average?
We've changed. No, we looked at state average last year, but we looked at a different source. So we based it upon state data, which is not the same as ACT data. So now we're going to look strictly at the cohort to the ACT readiness report. That's the shift from last year to this year to have more valid data.
And do we know, like last year, where we were? No. Okay. So this is our first real year with data.
With the state-funded exam, which is the biggest change because now the cohort is greater because every junior has access to the test for free because it's paid for by the state.
Okay.
So our end size is significantly different.
And I don't think it's fair to say it's this first year we've used data, generally. There's been a lot of data used. It just, this is, I think, the first year that, that there's been so much coordination and clarity as to what data to use, how to use it, what the expectations are, how people are working together.
I just mean on ACTs trying to get the 20% higher
Gotcha.
than the average.
Yes, because the state average has significantly changed because every junior is now testing.
Okay.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and walk you through a demonstration of Performance Matters, which is our data warehouse. So I apologize, this is so small. So this is the student detail page, and every student has its own, we can go to this page for every student in the district. We can have the schedule, we can look at their attendance. Discipline is not yet talking to Performance Matters. Early warning indicators, we have set up with the administrative teams kind of some key indicators that we think that are potential risk factors, attendance. So what will happen is you'll get this little warning if a student has missed 15 attendance events or more, 5 tardies, if they failed any courses, if they have a 1 or a 2 on an Ohio State test. It all kind of pops up on this early warning indicators. And then for middle school and high school students, there will actually be historical grades that you can see for the particular student as well. So this particular student is a 6th grader, and when we look at this particular tab, the test results, there are 3 different tests. Tests that are actually taken within the platform, taken within Performance Matter, state tests, and any other outside third vendor assessments such as MAP, the benchmark assist, the BAS, or DIBELS. So this particular student, our 6th grade math team, actually all 4th, 5th, and 6th graders in the past month have taken a test within Performance Matters that's all linked to the Ohio standards and our practice for Ohio State questions. So what's great about this particular system is every question is linked to a standard. And so we can look at this particular student and see that there are some standards that she's doing really, really well on, and there are some standards where this particular student is not doing well on. So when we look at how do we target that instruction, we can now look and say, these particular standards for this student, these are the ones that we need to have targeted. We can also look at state assessments. So any previous state test scores would be in here. And then additional test scores, all of their MAP data from fall, winter, their BAS information, their benchmark assessment system, their DIBELS, if it was administered, anything that we have, other additional tests would be here. So there's tons of information for each of the particular students. We can also look at standards. Right now, math is using the platform, and so we can see the math standards here. We are also looking and starting to use this Performance Matters as the MTSS, as Superintendent Sawyers had talked about. When we have those data meetings in regards to students, we are starting to track that information within this system.
Jessica?
Yeah.
So the math standards section there that you just clicked on, so that is that essentially rolling up all of the students so that you can just look at a certain area to understand? You were showing the specific student before, right? And
Yeah.
you could see some of those opportunities. This is just a rolled up aggregate.
Yeah, so this is still,
Got it.
this page is all about the particular student and how that student is doing on these particular standards. I'm going to show you what's called the baseball card, and then I'm going to also show you the test center, which I can look at my entire class at once. And so I can target, do I need to do a whole class instruction reteach, or do I just need to do small group reteach?
Awesome.
So if you clicked on one of those standards, would it show a grade for that student?
It just shows what the standards are, what the students percent, what the class, and then because the school and the district are the same, those same percentages. And it tells, this tracks the number of standards over, so let's say they took 3 tests and they all included this particular standard. This would be that student's score for that standard over multiple assessments.
But it's all in one location.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about the student detail? So this is the baseball card report, and this is, I pulled current sixth graders, and I looked at their previous math scores, their projected math scores that we get from Battelle for Kids, their MAP testing from winter and fall. This particular page, I specifically removed any student that was in the 50th percentile or higher on the winter math assessment. So then we could look and we could say we could start targeting those particular students. And so what this does is we can start to triangulate our data and not just look at MAP, but we can also look at previous Ohio State tests. We can then look at not just their MAP scores, but we then can compare it to their reading scores. Is there a student that might have a vocabulary acquisition issue, and is that hindering them from performing or understanding or grasping some of the math concepts? And so we can start to look at this and we can start to group the students based upon those different data points. And I'll be quite honest with you, this was a fascinating process sitting down with Ms. Toma and the MTSS team at the intermediate, and how we looked at this, how they tackled this particular piece and said, hey, this student hasn't been receiving reading intervention, but they dropped in their math. So what are we going to do? Now, not only do they need reading, but they need math. So how are we going to be creative and provide them those double scoops in both? And so this process here, they're still fine-tuning it, but being able to identify those students as soon as we have the information to provide that targeted instruction as soon as we group those students. Like I said, it was pretty fascinating, and it was pretty cool to see how the team was able to group and to provide those supports. Any questions about the baseball card?
You can manipulate it 100,000 different ways. That's the cool piece. It's back to Mr. Darrow's point about once the data is in the system, you can actually then use the system to understand how to make informed decisions to better meet the needs of the kids. And understanding your subgroups, who's scoring limited, who's scoring basic, what's the comparison, who's at risk, and then the early warning system that we've built for the triggers that the administrative team put together that pop up, tell the teacher, hey, something's going on with Jess. Did you know something's happening with Jess?
As we move students from grade to grade, are we clustering kids with like needs, or?
The data is all used. I mean, we have heterogeneous groupings of students within classrooms. There are some gifted clusters that do exist that are required based upon specific needs of students. But all of this data then forms how to create that heterogeneous or homogeneous group of students within a specific classroom. So it is used to help with class placement and balancing loads and specific needs. But not every kid with the same needs put in the same classroom. That may not be best educationally for the child.
That was my question.
There could be a social emotional issue that's not just about test data. So that social emotional issue might have a better fit that then gets supported. The test data is going to be used to support the student academically, but this isn't going to account yet. Discipline's not in here. That's a coming attraction. We started with the academic side of the house. We're adding things based upon the linkage that can occur. And quite honestly, that Jess is working on with Mike Voss, as Director of Technology, and Performance Matters. But we've talked about this data warehouse as a coming attraction for probably 2 years in the school district. This is the first time we've ever shown it to you.
This is amazing. It's so powerful.
But every classroom teacher, you want to show them the teacher card at the classroom level? Can you show one, or are all the kids' names on there? See, we can't give it to you because we'll violate FERPA.
Okay.
Because the little eyes will
all
come.
the names are going to show up. All the kids' pictures are in here. But there's like actually a dashboard that has every kid per the classroom teacher right on one screen that you can see what's happening with John, Phil, Mike, Debbie, and Paul, all in the same location.
I used to hide in the
show
back.
you that because it'll violate FERPA.
I used to hide in the back of the class. No more. Couldn't get away with it here.
So these first two parts, the student detail and the baseball card, I've been in all the buildings. Teachers are logged in using these two pieces are probably the most used within the buildings right now. Not only have I done whole group, but small group instruction in regards to the baseball card and the student detail. This next piece that I'm going to show you is really just kind of, we're rolling this out. I have the math team at the intermediate has kind of been, they jumped feet first and said, we want to do this. I have a couple teachers at the middle school and one teacher at the high school that has used the item analysis.
So it's not just state testing that's loaded in here, or is it?
Nope. So if I go back over here,
Anything you want to be.
so in this particular, I'll come back to this because it's told me it kicked me off. But these are all of the things, this isn't showing it. But I've put state test assessments in here, the DIBELS that the primary and the intermediate has put in. They have administered BAS, which is also administered at the primary. The pre-ACT scores, ACT scores, SAT scores, projections from BFK that were provided.
Just
You name
the
it.
great example that you're going to use, or the teacher example, to kind of follow up where Mrs. Kalinowski's going. Teachers do have the ability that you can build assessments within the system.
Yeah.
Specifically, and that's what Jess is going to show you here. There are some teachers that are starting to do this because you get instantaneous results that are disaggregated by standard or by student within your specific classroom based upon their performance to understand who those like groups may need to become that you're currently doing something different with. So this is an example of that specifically in math.
So like I said, math teachers at the intermediate have jumped feet first into actually creating their assessments within the platform. So the students actually take the assessment through Performance Matters. And what happens is within a matter of about 15 minutes of this, all the students completing, we end up with a nice item analysis of that particular test. So this is a 6th grade practice OST. They're all they're all OST-like questions, and they're linked to specific standards. So when I look at this particular set, there are things that pop out to me right away. I look at this bottom one. One student out of 155 earned 50% or higher, or 70% or higher on this particular question. So I can come over here, I can hover over it. It's going to tell me exactly what that standard is. Now I know as a teacher exactly what I need to reteach to the entire 6th grade class at this point. So this becomes, this is, like I said, within 15 minutes of students completing, I get an entire item analysis. When I come up here and see, I have 101 kids of the 155 that got this particular question right, then I know that I need to have small group reteach for these 40 students, 50 students.
And this tool provides assessments as well on each standard?
So at this point in time, they're actually creating their own assessments. They're
Okay.
creating their own test items, and we're linking them directly to the state standards. So not only do I get this nice by standard, I can then look and say, okay, what's going on with this particular question? If I don't remember exactly what the question is, it will show me the question. It'll show me if it was a multiple choice, if it was a drop down. They're still learning and still working with the different types of questions that are within the system. But also here, when I look at this, this was a multiple choice question. I can click, and then I can say, what was the most common incorrect answer? Because that's also going to provide me additional information in regards to what are my students' misconceptions and how can I use that information in order to help those students through those misconceptions. And so this is, once teachers have gotten their hands on it, they have been really, like I said, the 6th grade math team, the math team at the intermediate, they've all jumped feet first, actually to the point where we're now creating some ELA assessments for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade that are aligned to the OST as well. So we've started slow, but it is definitely spreading very quickly in regards to the power behind the item analysis within the platform.
So this work will continue throughout the remainder of the school year through the summer. We've talked about summer professional development learning opportunities or summer curriculum work that can specifically happen in grade level bands or grade level specific core content to then build things into the system now that we're starting to take it to the next level. So it's catching on. Data is a hard conversation to have. Not everyone is a data geek, but no offense, Jess, but Jess is our #1 data geek in the school district, which is really, really cool for us because you can see what she's doing to help our teachers understand at the student level, because this is very student specific, what we can be doing to help every student achieve and grow more every single day. Any questions about performance matters? We're going to stop here. We can spend hours and hours and hours in this tool, but there's only so many things you get to see because you're not allowed to see personally identifiable information of kids because of FERPA. But if there are other questions specific to this, we're happy to answer them before I review the last 3 benchmarks.
Really exciting.
That's great.
Love to see it at the student level and love to see this kind of stuff where you can go back and figure out what the kids are misperceiving. Thank you.
Comments now about this part of it in general?
Portion, yes. If we can talk about this before we finish the last 3, it would be very helpful because Jess is then just going to advance the slides for me on the last 3. But this is benchmarks 1 through 4 specifically on data. So if we could just talk about this portion before we finish the last 3. Any questions or comments, Mr. Darrow?
I have any questions. I have some comments. So I sat through a lot of this presentation a couple of weeks ago and was incredibly impressed. But it wasn't just being impressed that was so impressive to me. It was how we got to where we are. And some of this you've heard me say before, but it really does bear repeating because as any coach knows, you don't get excellent skills and excellent performance just by willing it to happen. You can't just say, I want to be better. That doesn't do anything. You have to take a systematic approach and build fundamental skills and work from there and build on those skills. And every teacher knows that because that's how people learn. So what was really heartening in the meeting a couple of weeks ago was understanding of how we got here and then seeing the tools. So as you all know, a couple of years ago, the board decided on and voted and adopted our statement of purpose. And we made a big deal about it, and we continue to make a big deal about it. But I'm going to try to show you how it ended up here with this sort of performance improvement. And also hopefully knock down some concerns that people have about teaching to the test, because that's a common concern you have when there's a focus on academic excellence. Is parents think that we're going to spend all of our time teaching to the test. That's not what's going on here. So with our clarity on statement of purpose, and to give you an example of how that clarity really matters, shortly after we adopted that, I was talking to one of our administrators, and I said, share with me what your goals and objectives look like in the previous year. And he showed me 4 pages, single-spaced, with a bunch of stuff on it. And he said, these are the goals and objectives. And I said, which ones did you focus on? And he said, whichever one was being talked about that week. And I said, well, what do you have now? And he pulls out a piece of paper, and it was half a page, double-spaced, and there were 6 items on it. I said, which ones do you focus on? He says, I can focus on all of them because of the clarity to create a culture of accountability that achieves the best academic and development outcomes for each student. Right? So then a couple of weeks ago, one of the teacher representatives, and let me be clear, as far as I'm concerned, I've never met a teacher that didn't want their kids to learn. I've never met one. I'm sure they exist, but I haven't met any. But just because you want something to happen doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And having clarity of purpose and having tools to help you get there are really important. So our clarity of purpose came out in the meeting a couple of weeks ago. I asked, I don't remember exactly what the question was, but this particular teacher said, well, once we had real clarity as to what the board expected and the administration was completely aligned to it, so we were able to focus our work too. So then we start going through some of these assessment tools and the way they're being used. And as more questions came out about, so what do you do when a child isn't getting it? And then Jess pulls up all of these reports and shows me all this data. And we start talking about, is this testing, teaching to the test? And it's like, no, there are certain things that we expect our kids to learn during the year at different parts of the year. And so all of these assessments help us identify whether kids are learning the material or not. If they're learning the material, they're going to do fine on the test. And it was, so, this is how we've gotten here over a period of a couple of years, is real clarity, real focus, and an understanding that, we're all in this to accomplish the same goals, but look, it's hard. We have to do this work. We have to have this data. So nobody's objecting to it, right? I mean, there's a lot of eagerness to see this data and make it work. So I had a great time at that meeting. It was a couple hours. But it went a little longer than it was supposed to because I kept asking questions, but I thought it was terrific. So I'm really excited by the results and
We're making
look forward to it.
It's a good thing. Other questions or comments?
Thank you.
It's hard. So Mr. Darrow said it. So, but the congratulations to the faculty, staff, administrators, and everybody that's doing this every single day. There's a significant amount of time that goes into creating individualized learning opportunities for kids based upon their specific needs. And I think at times we take that for granted. I will guarantee you it's not taken for granted when these data meetings are happening and the conversations, because people are energized, because the challenge then is, my kid can't be in the red. I don't like yellow either. I need green. So what do I have to do to help Johnny get the green? That's the new conversation, and it's a great conversation because it's what we need to talk about every day. So Jess, if you would do me a favor, because you're standing there, we're going to go through benchmarks 5, 6, and 7, if you please. But benchmark 5, Board of Education members, if you'll recall, and for our school community, it's to enhance school culture and social emotional well-being. This is in relationship to the age-appropriate student climate surveys, and we have conducted those already for this school year. We've completed the 2018 Gallup survey, and as reported at the last Board of Education meeting, we went through the results for the Hanover Social Emotional Learning Survey. So we've completed benchmark 5 surveys for the year. We're now in the process of unpacking them at the department, classroom, and building level to talk specifically about the results and what we can learn from them to continue to improve yet this school year, but more importantly, plan for next year as well. Benchmark 6 is the financial goal for the school district, and you'll recall that it's to reduce the fiscal year forecast by $609,235.91. On behalf of Ms. Jenkins and myself, and Mrs. Gerhardt's here this evening, so we'll pretend that she also agrees with my math. But this is the math that Mrs. Jenkins and I have done. We're in progress and we're on track. So to date, as of last Friday, we're at $562,345.24 towards our goal. I am confident between now and the end of the fiscal year that we will far exceed our goal, because that is what Ms. Jenkins and I are out to do. And lastly, benchmark 7. We've talked about this at previous Board of Education meetings, but it's to ensure community engagement, stakeholder satisfaction. We are in progress for completion of this benchmark. We will do the staff climate surveys in April in April of 18 via Hanover Research to have comparison data from last year. It'll look slightly different because we're in reconfigured buildings this year, so staff members have been moved around. Remember, we moved 200 people last summer, so we had a lot of movement. But we are going to do a staff climate survey. Dr. Troyer and I have worked with Hanover to finalize those, and they'll be administered in April. And then a parent guardian survey is still on schedule for May of 18.
I wonder if the wellness initiative should be under this benchmark.
It could be.
Next year.
I just think we should capture that there's a ton of work being done around that.
There is. So you're correct, and that might be something we also incorporate into the goal for next year.
Okay.
So we can talk about that. I'll make sure it's included in my summary for success.
Good.
Any questions about benchmarks 5 through 7? Jess, I thank you for
awesome.
pushing that little button over there. And I didn't have to touch the TV.
And thank you for the entire overview. You can see how powerful the tools are going to be and the potential.
Yeah, Jess is doing phenomenal things with our team and our staff across the school district. So I thank the Board of Education for supporting the fact that we needed a Jess. And now we're talking about the Jessets, how we're going to get Jess help. Wow. It's
All
a
right. Yes, moving on. We have multiple board policies to review tonight. Second reading. Mr. Sawyers.
So I'm not going to recap all of these. We have not changed them since our conversation at the last Board of Education meeting. They're either additions or subtractions or changes to existing Board of Education policy or new policy pursuant to Ohio Revised Code or changes in administrative guides. Any questions about any of them?
Okay. Thank you. First opportunity for public participation this evening. With none, we'll move on to treasurer's items A and B. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Darrell? Mr. Bush? Here.
The two items that we have on the agenda tonight are the monthly financials. So through January of 2018, we are on plan in all areas. And the second item is appropriation adjustments. There were several adjustments throughout the month and previous months that we held off. And three of them are related to just aligning the budget with grant funds that we were receiving. The high school has additional fundraising opportunities, so we were increasing their budget in order to allow for that. The high school also received additional grant funding for a project that one of the student activity groups is doing, and we also created an intermediate art account, which we had not had because the 2.8 and the primary or the 2.5 were combined last year. So that's new this month. And the other one was the boys tennis is going to be conducting an invitational, and the softball camp needed additional funds for fundraising. And that was all.
Any questions on any of those items? With none, may I have a roll call, please?
Vice President Darrow?
Yes.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
President McClellan?
Yes. Thank you very much. Now superintendent's items A through E. I have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
The addendum, yes. Thank you.
Second.
Mr. Newmoff. Mr. Bush. Thank you. Mr. Sawyers.
You guys keep stepping on each other.
Board of Education members, tonight's personnel action items are standard in relationship to monthly business for the board. There are three specific things I'd like to call your attention to this evening. The first, and it's bittersweet, but tonight's agenda includes the formal recommendation to accept the resignation of Dwight Carter as the high school principal. Mr. Carter joined our school district 4 years ago and has worked daily to cultivate strong, positive relationships with students, faculty, staff, parents, and community members alike. Mr. Carter has been and remains committed to creating the best learning environment for our students. After much contemplation, reflection, and conversations with Mr. Carter, he has publicly announced he's resigning as the New Albany High School principal effective July 31st, 2018, to pursue another professional opportunity that will still allow him to support administrators, teachers, and students by conducting professional learning sessions full-time. Mr. Carter will no longer serve as a high school principal. We've posted, publicly advertised, and will begin the recruitment process to secure a highly qualified candidate to replace Mr. Carter in the coming months. Dr. Troyer and I, as well as the members of our team, will involve parents, students, and community members in the process as they so desire to be involved. There's more information coming from Dr. Troyer's office to talk about how persons can become involved, including Board of Education members if you so choose. As a school district, we're very grateful for the positive impact Mr. Carter has had in our school district overall, and I'm confident that he will finish the school year strong by reminding everyone every day that you can choose to make it a great day or not. The choice is yours. Mr. Carter. In addition to that, also on the agenda this evening, I'm pleased to introduce Mrs. Lori Lofton and I'll invite Lori to the podium in just a second to greet you. But Mrs. Lori Lofton is here this evening. Mrs. Lofton has over 27 years of experience. She's bringing to the New Albany Plain Local Schools as the recommended candidate for hire as the assistant superintendent. She is a student-centered, relationship-oriented leader who believes in our statement of purpose and expectations for continuous improvement to benefit students, staff, and our communities. Her resume includes previous experience as the Executive Director of Human Resources for the Westerville City Schools, as well as Senior Executive Director for the Center for the Teaching Profession at the Ohio Department of Education. With your approval this evening, Mrs. Lofton will officially join the school district to replace the infamous Dr. Marilyn Troyer on August 1st, 2018, with additional summer work days as necessary to facilitate the seamless transition to the role of the assistant superintendent. It's my pleasure to publicly introduce and welcome Mrs. Lofton to the podium to greet the Board of Education in our community as the next assistant superintendent for the New Albany Plain Local Schools. Mrs. Lofton.
Thank you. Good evening, President McClellan, members of the Board of Education, and Mr. Sawyers. I'm very honored to be selected as the next assistant superintendent to follow Dr. Troyer. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to work with her for a bit before she retires. And just listening tonight, I'm so excited about the work and positive work that's being done here, the guiding purpose, clarity. You have a wonderful team. Everyone has been so welcoming already, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this wonderful district and this team. I would like to thank, if I may, my husband and my daughter, Jordan, who are here to support me tonight and who surprised me with my dad and my sister also joining us my dad from out of town. So that was a wonderful cap to my evening. So thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Welcome.
Additionally, this evening, I'm also pleased to introduce publicly Ms. Carol Hamilton. Carol is the recommended candidate for hire as the coordinator of food services, replacing Mrs. Pam Charles, who is retiring after 30 years of service with the school district, over 30 years of service with the district. Ms. Hamilton brings over 25 years experience in the food industry and has introduced programs such as Foodie Fridays, and that'll be a coming attraction to New Albany. In her current position as the Director of Food Services with Grandview Heights City Schools. Carol has been with Grandview for the last 14 years, so we are very fortunate to get an experienced food service coordinator for our school district. Ms. Hamilton's committed to student wellness and clearly understands the importance of child nutrition to academic achievement and growth. I'm confident that Ms. Hamilton's background and experience will only improve upon our successful food service operations today. With your approval this evening, Ms. Hamilton will join our school district for transition with Mrs. Charles on May 1st. Welcome, Mrs. Hamilton.
Thank you.
Ms. Hamilton, would you like to say anything publicly to the board?
Right here will be fine, thank you.
You'll have to.
You did not tell me.
We do television.
Let me be prepared for that. But I am excited for the opportunity though, and hope that I can just fall right into place and continue the work that appears to be very positive being done. And I thank everyone for the interview process and thank you for the recommendation.
Thank you.
Welcome. Congratulations and welcome. That concludes the report for personnel.
Yes.
I'll be ready next time.
Hey, I told you you're getting your picture taken.
Oh, you told me.
Under general business this evening, you have multiple recommendations that Dr. Troyer or I can speak to in relationship to incredible learning opportunities for our students abroad in 2019 at the middle school and high school level. If you have not checked out all of them, I would strongly encourage you to look at all the fabulous places that our kids are going, from Japan to Portugal to Milan to Venice to Great Britain to other parts of Italy, Spain, Portugal, Tanzania, New Zealand, Australia, Belize, Washington, D.C. We are bringing back the 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. Mrs. LeBeau and Dr. Peterson have an informational meeting, I believe, tomorrow evening to share the great learning opportunity that our 8th graders will have by returning to DC in November. In addition to that, you have a recommendation this evening to approve a capital purchase for carpet for the Ginny B. McCoy Center as part of the owner's agreement. The city, the township, and the school district share the costs associated to it. The district is the fiscal agent to actually do the work. Board policy this evening, we've talked about senior waiver this evening's in compliance with Board of Education policy, and the donations, as always, we are forever grateful to members of our generous community for their philanthropic or generous donations that they make to support academic learning and excellence across the school campus. Are there any other questions I can answer?
If more than 2 board members volunteer to go on one of those trips. Public meeting, right?
It's a sunshine violation. So there are enough trips that we can put you on one that you won't be together.
But you will have to chaperone students.
You'll have a small group of 6 to 10 kids. Mr. Galloway can tell you all about his New York trip this past weekend. So if you would like to participate, just let me know. I'll help make that happen.
Patrick's still here.
Any questions? We have a roll call, please.
Mr. Newmoff,
Yes.
Mr. Bush,
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
Vice President Darrow,
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes. Second opportunity for public participation. With none, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Darrow,
Second.
Ms. Kalinowski. Roll call, please.
Vice President Darrow,
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff,
Yes.
Mr. Bush,
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes, we are adjourned. Our next meeting is Monday, March 12th.